But I think that the Catholic Church, if we can find a way to, again, kind of diffuse into this other industry that's so universal, it's just going to be so beneficial for evangelizing people, reaching new young people. And again, maybe that's not having a Catholic game company that makes Super Noah's Ark 3D2 or whatever, whatever kind of game there is out there, but just people that are relating to what they're making, the beauty of what they're creating in the game industry back towards God.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Video Games and Evangelization. My name is Bobby Angel. I'm a fellow at the Word on Fire Institute, and with us again is Father Blake Britton, a priest of the Diocese of Orlando, a contributor to Word on Fire, and a fellow video game player. How you doing?
Doing very well, thank you. And I'm just excited about the guest that we have today and this outstanding topic.
Today's topic is music, which you're excited about as a musician and a video game lover. I am as well. Today we're interviewing Sean Beeson. Sean is a video game composer. He's a composer of all sorts of projects, secular, like cartoons, video games, slot machines, trailers, and even in the Catholic world of doing trailers for documentaries, including Knights of Columbus, the Hallow app, and including Word on Fire pivotal players as well. So we want to welcome to the show, Sean Beeson. Sean, how you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Sean, what's the first video game you've ever played?
So the first video game I ever remember playing was on the Sega Genesis. So it would have been in like late 80s, probably 1988. And the games that came with it were Sonic the Hedgehog and Altered Beast. So those are some of my youngest memories I have, period, of anything from my youth, is playing Sega Genesis for the first time and hearing the music and seeing the bright colors. And I know there were times before then that I also had played, with my dad, played King's Quest or Space Quest. You know, I couldn't read or type, but I would kind of sit on his lap and experience those games as well. But those are some of my earliest memories, period, of playing games.
Father Blake and I were reminiscing about Echo the Dolphin and other Sega Genesis classics that were very frustrating.
Yes.
Like, they were fun, but the difficulty was very high compared to nowadays.
And we were talking about the dolphin going into outer space as well.
Yeah, which made perfect sense.
The only thing that has aged well in those games is the music. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that, how some of these melodies are still with us 25, 30 years later,
yeah,
which is pretty amazing.
You mentioned, I know that I had spoken to you previously, Sean, before this interview, about Super Mario Brothers and how Koji Kondo, for example, was hired and brought onto the project in order to build up the repertoire of video game music to make it a more serious genre within the video game industry. And you had mentioned how some of those original soundtracks inspired you as well. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would record the soundtracks with a cassette player straight from the TV just so I could play the music back as I was doing other things around the house or out in the yard. I would listen to game soundtracks all the time and would even turn the games on, navigate to the options through the menu, and it would have the BGM select where you could choose to play one of the pieces of background music just like a CD player would now. And just would turn it on and listen to the music. So it definitely was an integral part of my childhood.
I remember games that would do that you could like listen to some of the tracks.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So Sean, do you mind running us through like your testimony of faith and then how you got involved in the video game industry?
Yeah, so I think the only thing I've been longer than a gamer is I've been a Catholic. I'm a cradle Catholic, born and raised. It's always been very near and dear to me. But I think just in my adult life, especially through receiving the sacraments and having children, I've grown even more and more in my faith. And I think it's only been further enhanced by being able to contribute and work on Catholic projects, which is just a small facet of what I do professionally. But it enables me to learn and enrich my own relationship with God while also helping kind of do that with other people. And then, professionally, I've always been interested in music, and it was really when I started to get into music technology, which was kind of this convergence of some of the same things I loved about games, the technology, the knobs, kind of working with computers, and then music coming into that at the same time. So this would have been in like the late 90s when you have like a Compaq or a Dell computer and you can load up music software and play games at the same time, that I really started to kind of get into composition more seriously, as well as recording music and composing my own pieces. And that was
great.
I think I was 13 then, and it's stuck with me since then, and I'm 36 now. So I've been doing it for most of my life. I've been writing music and messing around with computers, and yeah, I love it.
And you're a father now, too.
I am a father of 6 children, and they're all very interested in video games and their faith. Music, not as much, but we got plenty of time to work on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing for me, your testimony as a father. You know, you yourself are a gamer, and just the vigilance that you have as a father, trying to form your children in the Catholic faith while simultaneously having both feet firmly planted, if you will, in the video game world. And we've discussed that a couple of times. You know, how can we as parents, how can we as fathers, and as mothers really discern how to help our children be formed? We know that a lot of parents are watching these YouTube miniseries. So do you have any like advice or any sort of points of discernment for you as a parent of how you help form your children healthily, sort of in video game culture, and remain vigilant in that formation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I've done is I try to play some of the games along with my kids. You know, I try to make it a family experience, something that we can do together. The same way I wouldn't just let them browse on YouTube or Netflix without first making sure that what they're consuming, you know, it's not that it always has to have this super positive Christian message, but just to make sure that it's not unraveling any of the formation that we've been doing for the last 10 and 11 years of their lives. We want them to play games that are going to try to reinforce positive attitudes, things that kind of develop team building, right? So things that aren't super violent or aggressive or are detrimental to people. And you know, I think one big thing right away is that Nintendo is a great company that tends to make sure that a lot of their games that they say are appropriate for certain ages, that they really are. So I play through them all as part of my research as a parent to make sure that they're good. And Breath of the Wild, my son and I have definitely put close to 200 hours into that game, and I give it a thumbs up. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the best games I think Nintendo's made in a while. I mean, Zelda Breath of the Wild is superb. Its soundtrack, I mean, again, in your area of expertise as a composer, is superb. I mean, brilliant composition. As a musician, I deeply appreciate it. But just the notion of also having almost an open world RPG with Zelda was pretty incredible. And you're right, it's a very wholesome game, and Nintendo does tend to make those kind of games. So thank you for sharing that, because I know that's a concern on a lot of parents' hearts as they're parenting a gaming generation, especially with Gen Z, you know?
Right.
Yeah, and especially sorry.
Yeah, we've grown up. Like, we who grew up gaming now are becoming parents, and it's like, oh, like, how do I just, because we know not every game is great, not every game is healthy and good. So it's like, how do you instill this discernment and, again, not sheltering them completely from the realities of the world, but also like, yeah, this game is not appropriate for you to be playing or for anyone to be playing, you know?
Right. And I had mentioned to Father Blake previously that mobile gaming in general is very tricky. You know, kids like to have iPads and phones, and really there's a lot of games on those devices that are simply designed to make people addicted. Right, it's essentially gambling with their free-to-play methods of just getting kids hooked to this cycle of just doing these couple interactions and receiving, you know, getting the food and do the thing and you get the food. Just training kids to be addicted to very minimal gameplay. So we do like it when games actually have stories. There's actually something to it more than just glorified hidden gambling, because that's what it is. So I think mobile gaming, as much as I love it and I do a lot of work in that area, it is something that I think you definitely need to be vigilant of as a parent to make sure that your kids aren't just playing these games that are just getting them addicted.
Yeah.
And spending real money in all these microtransactions.
That too.
Yeah. Let's bring it back to the music. We share a common love of video game music. I grew up listening to the Chrono Trigger soundtrack over and over again, still to this day. Like Assassin's Creed is on my workout playlist. The role again of music and beauty in video games, and again, like that's something that is so harmonious with the Catholic thing, with again art and architecture and beauty, and that includes music. And Father Blake, you wrote an article detailing that, the beauty and the aesthetics, how it's all over the place in the video game industry.
Yeah, it was really fascinating because that's one of the first things that really stirred my heart to contemplate the deeper culture of video games. The fact that there was something more profound than just sheer entertainment within this industry was my own appreciation of the beauty of these soundtracks. And so I wrote this article on video games and aesthetics. It was based off of one particular video game called Journey, which is one of my favorite games of all time. And it was the soundtrack was written by Austin Wintry, who I know you're very familiar with, Sean. And the soundtrack was just superb. I mean, it was a sweeping orchestration, again, very complex, beautiful melodies, the tonalities, sort of a mixture of Eastern and Western tonalities and skill sets. And I wrote that article, and what was interesting was the game company that designed Journey, it's called That Game Company, they retweeted my article and shared it. They appreciated it so much, which goes to show the fact that a major game company who makes sort of these sort of indie games, they're called, a major game company read a Catholic priest article and his commentary on the aesthetics and the beauty of video games and actually shared it proudly, saying, you know, yeah, this priest was able to harp on what we were trying to capture with our soundtrack and with just our different graphics and the storyline of our video game. And that's what really first opened my mind and my heart, I think, to, again, the deeper culture that's present in video games. So for you, Sean, I mean, can you share with us a little bit about your own understanding of the relation between music and video games? Again, I remember John Williams in the 1980s and 90s when he first really started, emerging as a famous composer after working with Star Wars. They mentioned how before his time period, the soundtracks were sort of just, these synthesized, corny soundtracks, but he's the first one that gave movie soundtracks the sense of seriousness. They were standalone, and I think that video games have now reached the same quality. So, how would you, as a video game composer, how do you understand the relationship between video games and music and the importance that role plays?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, in film or in games, like you said, a soundtrack, the score to a game or a film, super important. I mean, just on the surface, it helps set the tone and set the mood of any event or circumstance in that game. Now, where I think games are a little different than, say, a TV show or a film is that those are linear forms of media, meaning that you're going to watch it and experience it the same way each time. The music's going to play back the same way every time you watch that show or that film. And maybe you really can relate to Star Wars, for example. The music and the story and the characters just really, gets you right here. And that's good. You've made an emotional connection with that. But not every person is going to have that relationship. But with games, it's nonlinear, meaning that the music doesn't always react to the game the same way, or the player's not going to play it and experience it the same way every time. And so I think the music really has opportunities to create these emotional relationships with the players, because in a way they're creating their own experience with the game, and the music is there helping kind of guide any emotions that they might have while they're playing that game. Even games that are kind of silly or kind of fun, you don't know where that person's at in their life or even why they're playing that game. Maybe they just need that escape from something in their life that's giving them some pain or frustration at that point. And that music that stand alone, listening to it just in your car, might seem kind of silly or goofy. I think of like Kirby music. Kind of goofy music.
Be careful, Sean. Okay, I love Kirby.
They're gonna come after me online. It seems like kind of just quirky, funny music. But if you're in a spot where you need to make this connection with the game as you're experiencing it, and it's a really hard boss, and you're about ready to die, and the music is doing this specific thing, it's aiding your entire experience that you're creating with this game. And you make these emotional connections the same way I remember as a child playing a game like Altered Beast that I knew nothing about, and you're beating up these bad guys that are, you know, zombies or demons or whatever they were, and your guy's powering up, and as a little kid your guy keeps getting huger and stronger and then starts punching fireballs, and the music kind of ramps up as you get to the boss, and you just feel as a kid that you've like unlocked some power that it's like, I still remember that feeling to this day, because the music with the visuals, with the story, made a connection with me, because I experienced it, because I guided myself through that experience. And so I think games, just in general, are such an interesting form of media, and music really is there to kind of guide the players through that experience, and I think it helps unlock a lot of emotional connections to that.
It's a fascinating, again, philosophical correlation between the linear versus the in statu, you know, meaning like the in the moment kind of composition. So you're right, in movies there's this notion that, okay, the movie's going to end in 2 hours and we have to know what the ending is, and so the music's sort of morphing in that way, and absolutely it has an emotional trigger within it. But video games are different. You're immersed. You are the character in the film. And so the music's aiding you in having this first-person encounter with the reality that's in front of you. And I think that's one of the reasons why video game soundtracks are so conducive to this kind of this emotive response, you know, because you're much more involved in a video game than you are watching a movie. On a movie, there's a character on a screen who's apart from you, but when you're playing a video game, you are the character. You're the one on the screen, quote unquote, and the music is for you. You know, so there's just this deep personal connection that's made with the soundtracks. At least that's what I found as a gamer.
Well, I've noticed too, again, you mentioned Kirby, and like as they keep making new Smash Brothers, I would notice how you have like the melodies and the tracks now they get the orchestrated treatment.
Right.
Like hearing Kirby's theme in like full orchestra, like when it got to the GameCube, was just like, this is cool. And to see again, like game developers take the soundtrack seriously. Some of these melodies, again, are going on 25, 30 years, which is beautiful. But then when you have a Hans Zimmer who's composed for Gladiator and Batman and Pirates, he starts composing video game soundtracks. It's like, oh wow, like there's a new corner we've turned in a seriousness to these AAA games and the attention to beauty. Like when it comes to beauty, from again the Catholic lens here, how would you define beauty even? Because it's not just like, oh, it's my preferred flavor of ice cream.
Right.
There's something about beauty that like grabs you and like can bring you to tears.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the end, beauty is the manifestation of truth and goodness. So I always say for my students in the middle school, you know, it's what truth and goodness sounds like, feels like, looks like. It's truth and goodness that you can touch with your hands, and you can see with your eyes, and hear with your ears, and you can smell with your nose. You know, food can be beautiful if it's presented in this artistic kind of form and way. Of course, music is beautiful if it's able to really match that form and that content of what it's trying to express. Art is beautiful when it really does have purpose and meaning behind it. So again, it's all, beauty is the shining forth of truth and of goodness. And video games have really done a magnificent job, in my opinion, and this is another reason why video game soundtracks are so popular, matching the form and the content of the game and its purpose, and now the music is perfectly matching with the game and its purpose. And that's speaking to the gamer as he's immersed or she's immersed into that purpose. It really is just such a powerful, powerful experience.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think you like you'd said, people seek truth. And I think that, you know, whether it's the music or the visuals or the narrative, when we're designing things for games, especially in the music, we're kind of seeking that beauty. You know, we're seeking to kind of craft that beauty, you know, and that doesn't always mean that the music needs to be beautiful, but we're trying to seek that emotion that's really going to kind of captivate the player. And there is some core element to that if it resonates with me, as a composer and an artist, it's going to resonate with the player or most players in some shape or form. And that's kind of the goal when you're creating music, is to have it resonate with the player, to kind of get them emotionally invested. And I think when, as a composer, you become emotionally invested in what you're doing, that tends to also resonate with the player and enhances the overall experience.
Yeah, there's one video game track that you composed that I listened to. It's on my gym workout list, actually. It was for that game, I think it's called War Theater. Is that right, Sean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's just, like you said, it's actually sort of a rough, grudgy soundtrack. So it wouldn't be quote unquote beautiful in the notion of like one of Mozart's symphonies, but it is beautiful insofar as when you listen to that, it's epic. You know, like it captures this notion of like you're going into battle and you have to fight. You know, I'm ready to lift my weights with all this intensity. And so I think it does. It captures that sentiment and those emotions that it's seeking.
I remember getting Nintendo Power magazine in the 90s, and like when Killer Instinct came out and they had like, you could get like a CD of the soundtrack music.
Yeah.
And that thing was, oh my gosh, that thing, the nostalgia factor. When you talk about music, especially how that can bring you back to all these different memories of your childhood, or even like, you mentioned like a person who's going through a difficult time in their life, that music can mean something. And we're all seeking that, we have that St. Augustine ache, that restless ache, where only in God can we be satisfied. And beauty is again, art, architecture, music can pierce through and give language to the thing that maybe where words fail, you know?
Yeah.
I was thinking too, like, you've gone to video game music concerts.
Yeah.
Because I went to a John Williams concert where they did like all the music from like Star Wars, like back to back, and it's full orchestra and it's great. And now again, they have video game concerts where people show up and you hear the scores of these amazing video games.
Yeah, it's impressive. And I don't know if you've ever been to a video game concert before. I assume you have. I mean, you've written soundtracks for video games. But, you know, I went to a Kingdom Hearts concert. Kingdom Hearts, in my opinion, has one of the best soundtracks ever. It is one of the best games ever. Bob and I have, you know, shared conversations about that topic, but I believe I am right. So anyways, I went to this concert with Brandon Vaught, who's also, you know, works with Word on Fire. And it was startling and reassuring to me that you go into the Walt Disney Performing Arts Center, which is a major sort of cultural hub in Orlando, Florida, and thousands of seats, every which one is full of young people, 35 years or younger, there to listen to a symphonic orchestra play music. And this music is not superficial. This music is not just, you know, little things composed of 1, 3, 5, you know, kind of chord progressions. This, once again, is complex orchestrations, beautiful music that is worthy to be put alongside some of those classical compositions of Beethoven and Mozart. And you have them there just to listen to that music and cheering. I mean, when they hear the theme of Dearly Beloved come on, I mean, you could hear the whole audience go crazy, you know? And it's just so reassuring for me as a priest and as a member of the church to see that there is still that ache for beauty in the hearts of God's people, especially in the young people. And I think that, again, video game soundtracks is one of the main places where we see that manifest. I mean, would you agree? And does that sort of give you any sense of hope?
Oh, absolutely. And it gives me a lot of hope because the music's not just there to be entertaining, right? There's something beyond that entertainment factor. And it's very easy to look at the game industry and say, well, it's worth, you know, how many billions of dollars. It's just there to entertain. But again, it's so much more than that. And I think it really kind of goes back to people making those connections with the games. And the reason that they're making those connections is because they're seeking beauty, and there's truth in that beauty that leads back to God. And in Kingdom Hearts, for example, I love the music from is it Traverse Town? I think it's
Traverse Town. Yeah,
it's been since my junior year in high school since I've really played a Kingdom Hearts game. But that music for that particular you know, the town that you're in there is just phenomenal, and I still remember it, you know, note for note all these years later. But I think the flip side of that, too, is there's certain games that don't even have great symphonic tracks like that still impact people in a completely different way that kind of gives them kind of a sympathetic resonance emotionally with the experience. And one that I played recently that was like that is the game Resident Evil Village, which is there's just not really a whole lot in terms of music, but the little that they have there just sticks out to you as being something where it's just so able to acutely target your emotions and play on them, that just also really kind of draws you back to that beauty of what they've done with the music or the sound. You know, I don't even know if you could call some of it music as much as what it's musical sound design. Yeah. Just with the texture and the spacing, that when you really start to listen to it and think about how it works in the context of the game, there's really something that's phenomenal and fantastic about it. Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's something present a lot in horror films, which I find unique, is when they make these compositions, they'll have, for example, like 20 stringed instruments all playing different notes on top of each other and making this cacophony, this clashing sound right before the monster pops out, or right before, you know, the guy with the axe starts chasing you. And you're right, it's completely silent, and you just hear the strings start doing their tremolo, you know, and it's like, okay, the shoe's about to drop. And you start getting nervous in your seat wondering what's going to happen. And in a game like Resident Evil, which I avoid like the plague, I know that you've played, I am not a Resident Evil guy.
I like to play them late at night with the lights out.
So he likes to torture himself. I cannot go anywhere near those kind of games. But in a game like that, you do get that sense of just how important the music is and the role that it plays.
So, Sean, can you walk us through, someone comes to you, and how does that process work of like, just kind of start to finish of like, you have to compose for this project? And I'm sure it varies too on like the genre. Again, is this a cell phone game? Is this a console game? Is this just a trailer? But like, what's the musical process you work through?
Right. So usually, I'm lucky if I can get to play much of the game before I start writing music. That seems rare. A lot of people would say, well, you don't get to play the whole game and then write the music. Usually not. For two reasons. One of which is because writing the music can take so long sometimes that the game isn't in a finished state to be able to really play much of it. And then secondly, often there's legal hurdles, right? So since I'm outside of a company, I'm an outside contractor, there's a lot of times they don't want to send you a complete version of the game in the event that it would get leaked. Then, you know, they have problems dealing with that. So I'm usually lucky if I can get what's often called a game design Bible, right? They'll refer to it as a design Bible or a master document that lays out kind of the entire narrative of the game or the important points that I need to know, as well as information about the lore, the characters, a lot of the key points in the game. And then it will usually reference different influences of music or styles that they like, called reference music. And then usually we'll just sit down, I'll just start composing, you know, so I'll sit in front of a piano, and what I have here now it's a keyboard. I'll refer to it as a piano, but it's hooked up to a bunch of computers, and I'll just have piano sounds on my computers. So it's like sitting in front of a piano the way maybe Beethoven would have done, but it's a little more modern. And I will sketch a piece. So it'll be a very bare bones piece that's just designed to kind of reflect the way that the music's going to work. And you'll send that to the client. They'll put it in. They collect feedback to make sure that the piece feels like it's emotionally working, that it feels like it's working in the context of the game. In the most simplistic way, that's how it works. When you start to get into games that are a little more advanced and the music becomes more dynamic or interactive, then you have to start getting a little more clever with the logic of how you're composing. You know, so maybe this certain thing will happen in a game and the music needs to, you know, turn really quick. You have to start thinking of your music in terms of form and analysis. So you'll have a part of a piece and another part of a piece in two different states. So maybe when a character's exploring and when a character's in combat. And you need to find a way to get from A to B through some kind of a musical transition. So there's lots of logic, and there's lots of planning sometimes that goes into pieces outside of just being artistic. So that's the process, and
Wow.
it can take months. You'll write a lot of music, and then something about a character will change 3 months down the road, where they're like, okay, we've changed the protagonist from a Viking to a ninja, so now the music needs to have that change. The instrumentation needs to have that change to reflect those slight changes in the lore in the game. So the music's never really done until the game is released, and it seems like you're always working on things up to the last minute.
Something that we asked a couple of our other guests, and I'd be interested to know this, is how has your Catholic faith informed that process? So, we spoke with some game designers, with some professors from universities who help oversee game design and communication, stuff like that, and they all mentioned how their own formation as Catholics in some way, shape, or form have been woven into their ability to provide their profession. I'm sure it has for you as well. I mean, the Catholic Church has the longest standing tradition of beauty in world history, to over 2,000 years of unbroken lineage of beauty and appreciation of that, especially once you reach the medieval period and really climax as far as the construction of Gothic cathedrals and what have you.
And development of music.
And development of music, and in particular. So for you as a musician, I mean, what has your Catholic faith and the roots of that faith done to inform your appreciation of beauty and your ability to manifest beauty within this particular industry?
So from a musical perspective, I think one thing that I've picked up from my Catholic faith, talking about, the music that's really been kind of preserved by the church, stuff from great composers from the Baroque period, the medieval period. One thing that all of that music has done is it has such wonderful pacing, right? Like the music always feels like it breathes. Because it has to when it's been monophonic chant or polyphonic chant, or even very basic motets or instrumental music. All of it is crafted so perfectly with how it breathes, and it has a sense of pace to the entire composition. So not even just in terms of a musical phrase, but the entire work has such wonderful pacing to it. And I think in video games, often what happens is you get into kind of these very blocky 4-bar loops, where it'll just, you think of like Tetris or even Mario, it's fantastic music, but it's very blocky. And with any great composition, the struggle always is to have your music feel like it's horizontal, not vertical. And I think that chant music in particular is very horizontal. And for people that aren't musicians, they're probably saying, I don't know what he's talking about. This is making no sense. But if you listen to some chant music, you'll hear that every end of a phrase is the beginning of another phrase. Every end of a small piece is the beginning of something bigger. And I think that all music seeks to have that continuation, that cyclical nature of the music. And so I strive for that in my music, because I think that really enables people to listen to the music and to get lost in what they're hearing. It becomes not a distraction. It doesn't become a separate element from the game. It becomes part of their experience as a player. And then that's something that...
Sorry, please, go ahead.
I was going to say, just as a Catholic in general that works in an entertainment industry, I've just learned to be compassionate and prayerful, towards people I work with, because there's so many people that, of course, are not Catholic or have no faith or are even aggressive towards people of the faith. And it's taken me 10 years to go from hiding my faith and kind of, trying to preserve my own career to reaching a point now where I'm like, I'm Catholic and I'm proud of it. And I don't care if you don't like it. I'm still going to work with you. And I still love working in the industry. But I think that's really helped my relationships with people, which helps further communication. And
yeah, I mean, that's so edifying to hear. Again, we've heard that from multiple guests how you have remained faithful to this industry, despite the fact that it could be a highly secularized industry, and your faith in Christ has kept you rooted in this, and that you've been a witness in the world. I mean, it's so in line with also what the Second Vatican Council in Lumen Gentium speaks about in its chapter on the laity, how myself as a priest, I have my own set of responsibilities through sacred ordination. I'm not able to be the composer in a video game industry, but you are. And that industry needs Catholics just as much as any other industry does. And the fact that people like you and Paul and Dr. Castronova, some of these other people that we've been inviting onto the show, you're being faithful to your Catholic faith within the context of the industry is so inspiring. I mean, it really does it touches my soul. It's awesome.
Yeah, that you've said yes, and you draw upon the history of the church while, again, being like a co-creator, that God wants us playing in the sandbox of what he's created. And he wants us to mess around and, again, kind of play with the Legos of creation, like, you know, physically and musically and all that, and see what we come up with. That's beautiful. What are some of your favorite video game soundtracks?
Yeah, I have a lot. Going back many years on the Sega Genesis. I'm a huge fan of the Sega Genesis sound chip. You know, it was FM synthesis, so it just had a very kind of intense guttural sound to it, and I really liked the Castlevania Bloodlines soundtrack, and then the soundtrack to Strider, and both of those soundtracks were composed primarily by Japanese women, which I didn't know until I was well into my adult age, that you know, it's like the game industry also supports musicians and composers of all backgrounds and all ethnicities, which is awesome to be able to hear music from all of these different cultures. And you of course, the Final Fantasy games all have phenomenal soundtracks. And Chrono Trigger, I think I can hum every piece of music from that game. Because
you and Bob can do that together. You know, you can hum it. That's one of his favorites.
We can walk around to the frog theme later.
Yeah. Do, 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 do. Yeah.
And a single tear fell from my eye.
But all those pieces of music, they represented the characters so perfectly. And each of the stories that those characters had, it reflected their personal trials that they had in that game. That, you know, I think I've played through that game a dozen times and beat it. And I would still go back through and play it even in adulthood. It's held up that well with everything. And then in terms of modern games, I think Bioshock has a phenomenal soundtrack. It's that blend of, you know, being beautiful, but also being eerie, being spooky. And there's something about it that feels very nostalgic when you're playing the game. That it's almost like reaching back in time to speak to the way that things were in Rapture before the whole city started to go crazy, but then also speaks to the craziness of what happened, not to spoil the game for anyone who has played it.
It's heartbreaking. Like, the way they do the strings, it's like, it's that blend of beautiful, eerie, but heartbreaking too, because it is kind of a tragedy of a story.
Yeah, they I agree with you also as far as the Japanese composers go, who I've been astounded with. Once again, just as a musician myself, I think of movie composers like Joe Hisaishi, who composes a lot for Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki and some of his films, just outstanding, Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro and all these things. But also in the video game industry, just they have this ability to synthesize, to blend so magnificently Western and Eastern tonalities to make these really just sweeping soundtracks that are superb, like Final Fantasy, which I think is one of the prime examples of outstanding Japanese composition. And it's funny that you mentioned Castlevania, because the other day, I was actually listening to the Castlevania soundtrack, Bloody Tears, which I think is such a brilliant composition. I would not suggest for any parents out there, don't let your kids watch Castlevania show, okay? Do not let them do that. But as far as the soundtrack, great soundtrack, wonderful themes, and of course the video games themselves are just superb. So it's interesting to hear from you as a video game composer the soundtracks that have influenced you and the ones that sort of stick out to you, you know?
Yeah, and I think I got into game music primarily from Japanese composer soundtracks for games. I mean, that's what we grew up with primarily. on Genesis, or Mega Drive is what they would have called it in Japan. And there were great American composers like Tommy Tallarico did some phenomenal stuff as well during the early 16-bit days, and there were composers that did great stuff for the NES. But I would say that really a lot of Western and American composers really kind of came to their peak again when we started to reach digital media with games, when you could start to put live recordings on the games. And Chance Thomas is a composer that did music for, did some of the first live orchestral soundtracks for games. And I remember hearing those growing up, and I was like, wait a second, how did we get from like Sonic to this?
Right.
It was just such a mind-blowing thing.
Yeah, there's been a big leap insofar as video game composition in the past couple decades. And I think of people like Austin Wintry, yourself, Sean, and Jeremy Soule, who's probably one of the most famous, for his compositions of Skyrim, which, sort of took to a whole new level.
Well, again, the ability of beauty to pierce through, to kind of shake you and wake you out of just kind of the routine of daily existence. Like I was working the other day and Spotify is doing its random thing, and this track, The Streets of Whiterun, comes on from the Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, and I had to stop what I was doing because I just was like, what is this track? What is this? And it did not surprise me it came from a video game. I had to stop what I was doing because like beauty, it grabs you by the lapels.
Yes.
Again, whether it's architecture or music or seeing Christ on the cross, it is this moment of like, stop what you're doing and enter into this moment, enter into this thing right here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's superb that this industry's been able to capitalize on that notion of beauty. And it does this always because it points, even if the composer doesn't know it, and this is what I find so magnificent, is even if the composer is not cognizant of the fact, when they compose something beautiful and profound, they're pointing towards God. That's why it strikes the soul so deeply, and that's one of the main focuses of this series, and of course the Institute, the focus now that we're having on video game industry and evangelization, is that these young men and women who are falling in love with video games, falling in love with the soundtracks, with the storylines, with the graphics, they're doing so because in the end they're getting little taste of divinity, little taste of their Lord, of their Savior, who of course is the most beautiful thing to ever exist, is the incarnation, is the cross, is the sacrifice and the love of Christ. And these composers and these various compositions tap into that beauty and that divinity, and that's why it enraptures us. And I'm right there with you. There have been several times I always listen to video game soundtracks in the background while I work, like any millennial or Gen Z does nowadays. And as I'm working, in the parish, it's funny, sometimes some of the older employees in the parish will walk by and say, "Father, that's great. What composer is that? Is that Beethoven, Mozart?" I'm like, Sean Beeson. But it enraptures you, and sometimes I just have to stop, and I'm just in tears, thinking, my God, they've captured something here in my soul that's quite unique.
Yeah. Sean, for any aspiring musician who, again, has a love of video games, is maybe Catholic, maybe not, but wants to get into this kind of career that you've made for yourself, like what encouragement would you give to a young person hoping to be a musician?
I would say just jump right in. The game industry has so few barriers to it. If you want to be a Hollywood film composer, you tend to have to be in that area. You have to be kind of rubbing elbows, with those people. If you want to make a film, you have to have so many pieces that are perfectly aligned to make that happen. The game industry, you can download different pieces of software that allows you to make your own Pong game in like 2 days. Find some buddies, find some people that want to make games. There's billions of people out there that play games. There's millions of people that probably want to make games in the future. Find 3 of those people and say, I am interested in doing sound. I want to make sound effects. I want to make the funny voices. I want to make the score. Let me do it. Yeah. And just reach out to other composers, because the game composers generally are very approachable, very nice. We'd mentioned Austin Wintry. You could send Austin a message and he would send a message back, because they're all gamers first and foremost, and that's why they're in the game industry. And so when other people come and say to them, I'm interested in games, I'm a gamer, show me how to do this, or point me in a direction, they'll gladly do it, because we all kind of celebrate that love of games.
Wow. And I would love to see more Catholics involved in this industry. There's so much potential for positive Catholic influence, as you have witnessed yourself, again, as some of our other guests have witnessed. And part of the Catholic genius is our ability to go into an industry and to subtly, with nuance, influence the Catholic genius. So this is a major distinction, for example, between maybe like fundamental Protestant notion of evangelization and the Catholic notion of evangelization. And Tolkien says it quite wonderfully when he mentions how a Catholic diffuses his environment with the faith. And so you read something like Lord of the Rings that does not mention the name Jesus Christ a single time, and yet it is among one of the most Catholic works to ever exist. That's the genius of Catholicism. It infuses reality with Christ. It infuses reality in these subtle, nuanced ways. And I've seen through compositions such as yours, I've seen through work, like Paul and some of these other guys we've spoken with, that their Catholicity has been diffused throughout the industry. And it would just be amazing if we had more Catholics doing that. It doesn't mean that we have to make, a video game about Bible trivia, right? We can make these epic, amazing games that really encapsulate Catholic virtue, and it would speak to tens of millions of people, no doubt, just like something like Lord of the Rings has. It really is encouraging to see that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be great if we had that Catholic game company that made, Rosary and Robbers, that people would play. We had Catholic developers, or Word on Fire Catholic Game Development Company would be great. And I think
look at that
eventually,
pitch. Okay.
Yeah,
writing it down right now.
It's a great idea. Print it. But I think at some point we can get there. But I think what we need is more developers and more gamers who are Catholic and are able to speak about that, and to basically invite other people to kind of come into where they're at, because we're all at different levels in our faith. And I think that there's a lot of people that are composers that are Catholic, or are artists in the game industry that are Catholic, or even streamers that are Catholic, but they sometimes feel that maybe they can't talk about their faith because they may not feel educated or confident enough. But I think that that's okay, because we're all coming in at different levels. So, I am a Catholic composer, but I tend to refer to myself as a composer who's Catholic. And what I love about the Catholic Church, of course, is that it's universal. It's everywhere. And I would say that the Catholic Church is universal, and the game industry is also universal. Maybe not quite as universal as the church, just because the church has been around for thousands of years, and the game industry has really only been around for 50. But I think that the Catholic Church, if we can find a way to, again, kind of diffuse into this other industry that's so universal, it's just going to be so beneficial for evangelizing people, reaching new young people. And again, maybe that's not having a Catholic game company that makes Super Noah's Ark 3D 2 or whatever, whatever kind of game there is out there. But just people that are relating to what they're making, the beauty of what they're creating in the game industry, back towards God, because the church has this original beauty of a narrative, has this original beauty of the ritual of what we see that goes back to the fathers of the church, has this rich history of everything that we do. From motions to prayers to even the sounds and the smells. Like, the church is the original, God is the founder of this beauty, and the church is kind of really encapsulates that. And I think the game industry is also trying to do that. So there's a huge convergence of those two. And I think right now is the time that we need to find ways to bring those together somehow.
Amen. That's beautiful. I remember playing Ocarina of Time, and you walk into the temple, and you hear the chant, and I'm like, oh, Zelda's Catholic. This is great.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes they even have the characters dressed up pretty much like priests, or they will refer to the person as the priest of such a church, that it's just like they crossed out Catholic and put in whatever goddess or whatever's in the game.
Yeah, it is interesting how, I know you and I are both anime lovers. Even in the anime field right now, there's been like this hyper focus on religiosity and sort of almost a cultic Catholic aspect in anime. You know, to where even you have an anime like The Seven Deadly Sins, which is one of my favorites, and it literally has explicit references to the Ten Commandments, to the Seven Deadly Sins, to angels, to gods, to demons, and it's one of the most popular shows in the world. You know, and they're usually using totally Catholic symbolism, and they're using Catholic sentiments in order to capture people's hearts. So it's there, you know, it's ingrained in their hearts. We just have to find a way to tap into that, which again is one of the main purposes of this whole series, and hopefully that will launch a conversation on a wider scale throughout this industry for us all to connect as Catholics, so as to better evangelize one another.
And those are great opportunities for some of those games or shows, because I can think of a handful of games that try to be they try to blaspheme things in the church.
Right.
If someone just simply addressed, like, what you're seeing here is this actually has some history in the church, and the way that they usually try to put down the church is just, it's not even accurate or correct or even well done. You know, they just try to make everything that's religious or sacred creepy or dark. Right. And it's like, wow, you really did a bad job. There's far more scary things in the history of the church, you know, in terms of real evil, you know, right. That I think there's a lot there that can be done to kind of discuss those points and bring people back around to the beauty.
I think it's something like Bloodborne, you know, one of the main sort of villains or background. It's a very, again, has a lot of Catholic symbolism. Or a game like, I think it's called Blasphemous. Is another game where, I mean, everything was explicitly Catholic in this sort of mocking kind of way. And you're right, they used the church as an opportunity to create it as a villain, but none of it was accurate whatsoever. And so I've seen both sides. On, you know, one hand, we've seen this sense of the church has relevance. For good or for ill, the church is relevant. And that's, G.K. Chesterton says something so touching in his book on conversion, when he says what really brought him to Catholicism was that after 2,000 years, it's still treated like a novelty. You know, it's the oldest institution on the planet, but yet it still strikes people as something either to be hated or to be loved. You can never be lukewarm about Catholicism. You know, it's either all or nothing, and that's because it's true. And you see that even being manifested in the gaming industry, like with games like Blasphemous, which sort of explicitly attack the church and use it to sort of as this cultic, mysterious thing, or you see correlations like in the anime field, where actually there's some wonderful depictions, like Fate Grand Order. You know, one of the heroes is a priest, you know, who's fighting and sort of protecting his very virtuous character, and he's a Catholic priest. And it's just so fascinating to me that Japanese culture, in this case, which is not a Catholic culture whatsoever, has really focused on this, and now this is appealing to tens of millions of people around the world. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of potential there, and utilizing beauty in the video game industry, I think, will be key to that whole topic.
Sean, we could go for another hour, but this has been a fantastic conversation. Do you have a website or social media presence that you would send people to if people want to learn more about your work?
Yeah, Sean, it's SeanBeeson.com. So that's SeanBeeson.com. Or you can just Google me. I'm sure I come up on a million different platforms, or YouTube. And you can hear some of my work in a lot of Word on Fire videos, Knights of Columbus, Spirit Juice, in the Catholic world as well.
That's great, dude. Thanks again. This has been a pleasure.
You're welcome. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolute blessing. Thank you so much, Sean. A real gift, and just an amazing conversation. So I encourage our audience, please go listen to some of Sean's work, support a Catholic artist in the industry, but also really pray and think about the things that we discussed. I mean, this is a very, very important topic, and one of the main purposes of this series, along with evangelization, is also to help us recognize that in the video game industry, it's it's tapping into these transcendental truths that we really need to recognize, and one of those is beauty. I mean, they have really capitalized on beauty. They've been able to use that to touch billions of people around the world, and we need to discern ways to actively engage that, to first recognize it, and then to utilize it for the sake of our own gospel. So Sean, you were a perfect example of that. Thank you for being a Catholic in the world. Thank you for your vocation as a husband, as a father in the church, and just know that you continue to be in our thoughts and prayers. So keep up the fight, brother.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and stay tuned for more in this series on video games and evangelization. I'm Bobby Angel.
And I'm Father Blake Britton. God bless, and game on.